So the first question that I ask every single person that I talk to is, can you please introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yes, my name is Christopher Chancey. I am the CEO of ManaVoid Entertainment. About 50 people work at ManaVoid now. I teach in two universities, University of Montreal and UQAT. I teach game design, I teach programming, and I teach marketing in video games. I have an incubator accelerator called the Indie Asylum of Montreal, where I invest in startups through our incubator to essentially help startups in video games make it and not make the same mistakes that I made in the past 10 years. And in my spare time, I am president of La Guilde du Jeu Vidéo du Québec, which is our local cluster that represents the video game industry with governments and all that kind of stuff.
So you're just doing it all. I mean, that's what that's telling me right now.
I have no kids. I have a very understanding wife, and sleep is not for me.
Wow. I mean, well, thank you for taking the time to be here and on the panel tonight. I mean, let's start with ManaVoid.
Yeah.
So what is the story behind ManaVoid? Who is ManaVoid? What is ManaVoid?
Yeah, I think, well, ManaVoid was founded in 2014, and we were coming at a time where the barriers to entry to make video games had really fallen down. You know, you used to be, not to really be able to distribute games, you know, you needed that shelf space at Walmart to be able to succeed making games. And when Steam came around in the early 2010s, it really changed the dynamic. And so suddenly a lot of people could make their own video games and distribute them to hundreds of millions of people around the world.
Right.
And so we saw the opportunity straight out of university. So me and two colleagues at the time to start our own thing. I had a programming background. We were all coming out of a program in University of Montreal. It's like a kind of a professional game design program.
Okay.
And so we founded ManaVoid together then, and I've never looked back. At the time, there weren't as many jobs available out there for game designers, so we figured, listen, we're going to design this game, make a Kickstarter, and if it happens, great. And if it doesn't, well, it's just another thing we can put in our experience and our portfolio and go on.
And for everyone listening, what's that game that you're referring to?
Yeah, the game was called Epic Manager. So one of the things that we felt that we were doing different when we started the company was we were looking at marketing for indie developers. Like a lot of people start becoming video game developers coming from like a programming background or a design background or an art background. Very rarely do people come in with a finance or a marketing background to make video games. And we felt that people were just making games that no one wanted really to play. They were just making games that made them passionate to make, but that didn't really have a market. So at the time, I think the biggest games were Skyrim and a game called Football Manager. And we decided to make Epic Manager, which was a fantasy kind of sports management where you would hire adventurers, give them gold bonuses, signing bonuses, that kind of stuff, duration and term of contracts, that kind of, and then we send them out to do quests in the world. They bring back gold, we'd hire better adventurers and so on and so forth. And you'd be fighting against other adventure agencies, and it was kind of like a sports field to a fantasy game.
Right.
And we did it with 3 people and almost no budget. The game sold relatively well compared to the budget we put in.
Okay.
And then we had a Kickstarter campaign for it. And from there, you know, people started hiring us to make their Kickstarter campaigns. So I worked with a company called Borealis. I ran the marketing for a game called Mages of Mistralia, which shipped in 2017, I believe. And then we also worked with a studio from Quebec City called Polymorph. We did all their marketing, branding, and strategy for a game called Foundation, which was a city builder.
Cool.
And during that time, we started the process of our next project, what we wanted it to be. And that eventually became Rainbow Billy, which was shipped in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, we have Rainbow Billy in the space today, and I was actually just playing with some children this morning during our workshops, and many of them asked me where they can get it, and so I have informed them of where they can procure the game, because the colors alone are very I mean, it's called Rainbow Billy, but they grasp you, which is fantastic. And I also, as you were talking, I wanted, you know, for people listening, this is part of a educational games event, right? And so not all of those games you're talking about sound like educational titles. So where is kind of the line of education in the work that you and or ManaVoid do?
I think, you know, we try to make games with a certain intent. So even in Epic Manager at the time, a lot of the lore and a lot of the writing around the game, you know, spoke of social issues, injustices, that kind of stuff. It's always kind of, you want to put in messaging that's meaningful to you and fun to produce. Rainbow Billy is a weird one because it didn't really start with an intent of, you know, educating anything. You know, we kind of stumbled upon the opportunity. Rainbow Billy, initially my art director wanted to do something in black and white because Cuphead was really popular, and he was like, oh, you know, I'm really good in that art style, and he was, and I just felt like a black and white game wouldn't cut it, and I thought, you know, we need to put colors or it's going to be like jarring. And we ended up just, you know, annoying each other with it for like a few weeks, and settled on, okay, well, the game starts in black and white and you'll recolor it as it goes, and that kind of became like a design constraint. And then as we were developing the game, you know, playing around with colors and all of that kind of stuff, a lot of the themes, like narratively, that we started tackling were, you know, what makes you unique in the world, you know, like we wanted the characters to feel like kind of void and sad without the colors and all that kind of stuff, and so on and so forth. And we developed an entire rhetoric around the fact that, you know, like the enemy in the game is a Leviathan, which is more of like a paternalistic figure. The colors kind of represented the uniqueness of every individual in the game. And so we leaned into it even more, and we made our character a non-binary child. And then we had consultants come in and tell us what that's like when you're a child, and we wanted to represent that faithfully. And as it went, you know, we started developing new characters. We wanted to make the game non-violent as well, because we knew that we had an aesthetic that could be like mass market, and we wanted kids to maybe see something different than what they usually see in video games. There was a really sad statistic that came out in 2019. It said something like 85% of games at E3 had violence in them. And we're like, wow, that sucks. So we decided to, you know, to showcase the change that we'd like to see in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people come by and they'd be like, this reminds me of Undertale. And so was that an inspiration for you in making that game?
Yeah, definitely. Like in the mini games and in the storylines and all that kind of stuff. Undertale was a big inspiration for sure. Paper Mario, you know, more like mechanics and the aesthetic of it. Yeah, I think, you know, it was also during the pandemic that we ended up making this game. So it started in 2018, and then, you know, we ended up being in a dynamic where we were making a game that made us feel good in a moment in time where it was weird to feel joy. So
to put it bluntly.
And so a lot of the characters, there's like over 60 creatures in the game that are all going through some form of like, you know, trial or tribulation. And as Billy, you're just helping them through their shit. And a lot of the stories that are in the game are, you know, stories that people have felt in the studio in some form or another. So everyone was kind of able to put themselves into the game, and it resonated with a lot of different players. I still get emails of you know, a lot of cool things. Yeah.
So would you say that the work you're doing would be considered educational games, or would you frame that in a different way?
I wouldn't say that, like, it depends. Like, you know, the concept of serious games, for example, is, I feel like the intent is teaching. My intent is fun, you know, that's first and foremost. And then throughout that fun, if you can get something out of it, then that's just a bonus. So we do have, you know, the messaging behind everything we do has educational value. And we try and, like I said, you know, like the consultants that we put around us, we had like child writing consultants, because, you know, using a word like stupid, for example, is something that's dangerous because you're arming a child with that word afterwards. So, you know, how do you write certain things when you want to tackle subjects, but you want to see it through a kid's eyes? How does that work? And I think, you know, doing those things right kind of ends up being educational in some form for different, like, for a variety of people.
And so was your target audience to have it put in like educational spaces, or was it much more commercial?
It was commercial. Yeah. The publisher for the game is Skybound Games. They own a little franchise called The Walking Dead.
Just a small one.
Yeah. So The Walking Dead people ended up making my kids' game, publishing my kids' game. But,
I mean, I totally see the connection.
Of course, yeah, obviously. So no, the intent was definitely, you know, a commercial. But when we shipped the game, we had a lot of testimonials of people that, you know, were playing with their kids, and it opened up conversations. And you know, a lady emailed me last week saying that, you know, her child has autism and has trouble like talking about her feelings, but through these characters, they're able to kind of have discussions that they never had before. And, you know, things that we didn't really intend on doing initially, is just through doing it right in the game, like, you know, pushing communication, nonviolence, and talking about a lot of different, you know, mental health issues and that kind of stuff. I think it opened up a lot of educational things.
No, I love it. I mean, I love playing it. I mean, I know it's a game designed primarily for children to play, but I was enjoying playing through the game. And I mean, the mechanics weren't insanely challenging for me, but the colors alone, the art, I was laughing at some of the character voice line options. Like, could you imagine if I said that? It's really well done. So like, kudos to you for that. But I kind of want to pivot towards, because it sounds like you're also doing a lot to like give back to the industry. I mean, you're teaching, you're leading up all these different groups that are helping mentor or come alongside young designers. And so that seems like it's something very important to you as part of your role. And
yeah, I mean, when I started, no one really was there to help. Even like the concept of an indie studio, like every indie studio knew one or two other people making indie games, but we had no conception of how many we were. So at the time, we decided to create an organization called La Guilde. It was initially only indie studios, La Guilde des jeux vidéo indépendants du Québec, which in English is essentially indie developers in Quebec banding together. And in the inauguration of the cooperative, I think there was 60 studios, and we're like, oh my God, there's 60 studios. Yeah. And then within a year, we were 120 studios representing over 3,000 jobs. Wow. And then eventually we merged with another organization that was called the Digital Alliance, or l'Alliance Numérique, which was essentially Ubisoft, Warner Brothers, and the bigger studios. And basically they were absorbed into the cooperative. And today La Guilde represents the entire industry. So 15,000 jobs, over 300 studios. My biggest member is Ubisoft with like 4,000 employees. My smallest one is a one person in their garage, and everyone has the same amount of votes, and everyone is tackling their issues and understanding each other. So it's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been quite a feat to kind of get to happen and put together.
Yeah, it was a lot of convincing everyone that this was the move. You end up understanding the political aspects of it as well. I think the government was like, well, we don't really want to give too much to the indies because then the AAAs might not be happy, and vice versa. And so when we felt like it was just being essentially it was negative to be two organizations, and our goals were not mutually exclusive anyways, like we could achieve everyone's goals by banding together. It became like a no-brainer. It was just explaining that to everyone and making sure everyone understood the win-win situation. So
do you still have goals in mind around these kind of spaces? Like what's still missing in the industry, or what kind of next steps do you think should be kind of addressed? It's
like people might not know this, but Montreal is the third biggest area in the world to make video games. Put aside places in California, Tokyo. Montreal is up there in the world in terms of game development. We have more game developers per capita than any other city in the world. And so we really created an insane industry here. We have a lot of programs that are teaching how to make a variety of different video game jobs. We have government incentives for studios to install themselves here and invest in video games. So I mean, the recipe is pretty much there for us to keep growing and keep going as we've been. The industry also, I think everyone realized is pandemic proof. There was some issues like any other industry during the pandemic, but video games are one of the only industries that kept growing. I mean, literally I don't know how you say it in English, but the OMS, the Organisation Mondiale de la Santé, they were saying, stay at home, play video games. It was kind of part of their marketing.
Yeah.
So I think, video games are now in a different sphere. My mom plays video games, her levels in Candy Crush eclipse anything that I could ever achieve. And so I feel like there's a lot of opportunity, and there's no reason why we couldn't be first in the world in making video games here. And I just want to be part of that hype of helping studios grow. And also I think we've pivoted as an industry. Like in the 90s there was only big studios that were here, and we were kind of churning out games, we were doing service work. But today the majority of studios in Quebec, I think it's something like 87% of them are Quebec based, and we're developing intellectual property from here. And I think that's super exciting as well. Yeah. We're really good at making games. At this point, we need to learn how to sell them. So that's what we're working on now with the La Guilde.
But I mean, that's a fantastic point to end on. One, because of the time, but also I think it's a really great place for people who are listening to think about what's the next steps that they can start to engage in. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
My pleasure.
I look forward to chatting with you further in about an hour's time on the panel. So thank you so much, and all the best.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And if anyone is listening, we're just going to take a quick break as we swap interviewees. So sit tight, grab water, do whatever you need to do. Thanks.